and gentlemen, I welcome you all for the today's study circle on drafting mergers and acquisition strategy and due diligence management approach. To handle this session, we have an eminent speaker, none other than Pradyumna Nag. May I request senior member CA Pradyumna Nag escort the speaker and the dais. Welcome with floor, okay? Thank you, sir. I take this up to give a brief introduction of Pradyumna Nag. He is a chartered accountant by qualification and holds a postgraduate in international business strategy from IIFT Delhi. He is currently director of Frequate, a management finance advisory which has been featured among the fastest growing private companies in India, and written about for taking a pragmatic approach to financial strategy by a few national publications. Under the strategic finance office vertical, Frequate acts and manages a strategic assist group on matters ranging from corporate finance to international business to acquisition strategy. Under the IB M&A vertical, works with medium to large organizations to prepare them to PE and structure complex transactions. Nag heads the business strategy and investment banking, mergers and acquisition verticals. During his earlier stint at KPMG, he has worked with accounts such as Infosys, Mindtech, Levis, Philips, Akshaya Patra, and was a part of the APAC merger team for Cinder Electric. In his professional capacity, he has also been a co-opted member of the Committee on Public Affairs and Government Accounting of the Regional Council of the ICA and a co-convener for Chamber of Commerce and Industry for people of Indian origin across the world, and speaks in forums and universities on venture capital, corporate finance and international business strategy. In 2016, he chaired a state of PE industry and future outlook at the PE VC Summit in Bangalore. In 2017, he was a speaker at the Indonesia Economic Forum 2017 held in Jakarta, Indonesia. In 2018, he was a speaker at the Entrepreneur India Summit. His views and approach to valuation were published as part of the Professional Insights literature of the Valuation Standards Board of ICA. With this brief introduction, I present before you Pradyumna.
Firstly, thank you all for being here. It's an evening 6 o'clock session, so I'm hoping that your energies are still up there. Secondly, I'm extremely sorry that I got a little delayed. I overestimated Google Maps and ended up taking a wrong route. So starting off, let's get right to the point. I mean, we are all here to see how mergers and acquisitions work. It's a fancy word. I mean, everybody in the finance stream wants to get into mergers and acquisitions. At some point of time, they think, that's where the big money is. Now it's moved to investment banking slightly, so we club both and we said we want to do both. But quite honestly, if I have to define my passion, it would be on the mergers and acquisition side, because I think it's fantastic. When two businesses come together, what they can achieve is 10x more than what they can do individually. And the beauty of it is, if you plan it well, if you manage things well, then you have an opportunity of getting to that 10x far faster than what you predict. Right? So every organization itself finds certain challenges in growing, scaling, or being able to establish the next level of growth that they want to go after. And that's true, because the entrepreneur or the mindset of the CEO is still one. But there is somebody else always in whatever business there is. If I say the company that I work with is the best at what it does, there is something allied that somebody is better at. Right? So you need to find out who that person is. And if I was to look at us as a company, I would like to look and associate with people like this, because they can unlock the potential of the entire industry rather than potential of a service which I am looking at right now. So there's a very famous quote, right, from Henry Ford. He says, "Coming together is the beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success." Right? We very well understand the value of this, but in real terms, that's what business is all about. That's what life is all about. Right? We are nothing without our suppliers. We are nothing without our customers. We are nothing without our employees. But once you come together and work towards a common mission, you will be able to unlock so much more out of the same kind of business that you've been doing. So the first question, I mean, the fonts are a little wonky. I apologize. I think the system does not have many of those fonts already coded. So kindly excuse me on that. So the first question is why M&A itself, right? So there has to be some real value out of M&A. It's not just fun to come together and do business if it's not the right fit and you're not able to get the right leverage or the right synergy. Now, as an organization, is it worth a nut cracking, right? So, if you really think about it, not every business needs to go for an M&A, right? Whatever the field is, it has to be ready. Like even the acquirer as well as the acquired need to be at a position where they can absorb an M&A, right? So, the objective behind today's session, I will lay down in 4 simple points. Number 1, simplify the understanding and help create a foundation. Consider M&As as an important strategic move for any organization. Demystify and present options for consideration and execute more well thought out M&As. Right? But why is it so important today? It's so important today because we as gatekeepers or bearers of a large part of the businesses and the ability for us to look inward at many of these organizations gives us also the responsibility to figure out how we can help these businesses work together to grow. Now, the simplest thing is many chartered accountants help different people access capital at different points of time, right? They know a particular client has excess cash and they know a particular client has a project which requires cash, connect the two and then allow them to work together. Or in some cases, chartered accountants also look at projects and how they can help clients collaborate together to pitch on a bigger scale or a larger scale. And in some cases, chartered accountants also help these guys access large projects, right? So, for example, ICAI has a large project on, let's say, the students portal, and you get aware of it, and then you tell one of your clients who's in the technology services industry, why don't you pitch for this project? I think you're qualified, right? So those are the typical ways in which chartered accountants go out of their way to help. But the real next level is how do you get them to collaborate and work together as a single business unit. So what are these benefits that you could expect? Right? Many of it is theoretical, but I try to stay as practical as possible from my knowledge of working in this domain. So any leverage can either be an intra-functional leverage or an interfunctional leverage. Right? Intra-functional, you both are working on finance, but together you're able to come together and access a larger amount of finance. It could be on the management side. You have a great team functioning there, you have a great team functioning here. Hey, if we come together, we can lead this organization in a better way. On the business side, I have a great set of customers that you probably need. You have a great set of customers that I can probably upsell to. Let's work together. It could be on the sales and marketing side. I have an established sales office in, let's say, Florida, which has access to a lot of media companies. And I'm going to tell them that I can help you leverage that office for your offerings. It could be on the sustainability side, because the second you start hitting certain thresholds, right? Let's say in the technology services industry, 125 is that number, beyond which you become sort of scalable or you become sort of sustainable over a longer duration. Companies view you as a company that is going to sustain over the next 5 to 10 years. They would like to do business with you. The same thing in infrastructure could be 100 crores, right, in terms of assets. So like that, together, coming together, they could access larger opportunities than they individually would. Talent, one of the biggest challenges that companies face today is great talent in-house. Somebody who's extremely strong on the sales and marketing side might be faltering when it comes to delivery, right? Might be faltering when it comes to operations. Now, getting these two organizations to work together with one person hedging you or hedging the risks that you are going through can help you to work together in a way that is more sustainable. Or it could be on finance, right? So a larger company has deeper pockets, has more cash flows and reserves, has money to do ODIs, which is what you might need to be able to scale up or step up as an organization. Now, how do interfunctional leverages work? So this, I believe, obviously the first one is very straightforward. The second one is where it gets a little more complex. It's where it gets to the lines of management. How does finance and talent really come together? Like, how can I use a finance as a leverage to be able to solve a talent problem, right? So a simple thing in a merger is, the second the merger happens, they replace some of the management with strong management brought in from outside who can give a fresh view to things, or they start looking inward into the organization to figure out abilities in which only the top talent is allowed to stay behind. If you say business and finance, I can pitch for a project where I have a 3-year recovery as compared to trying to go about it on a day-to-day basis. Let's say finance and sales and marketing, I need the gunpowder to be able to establish the marketing in a right way, but I can't really do it, right? So there's a very huge difference between 200 rupees spent in marketing versus 2 crores spent in marketing. It's not a pure mathematical 2 into 100, right? It's a lot larger. The return can be 10 times more. So we, as consultants, as chartered accountants, have this ability to be able to create projections, to be able to create simulations, to be able to create many of these things that they require to be able to foresee the future in a way that they can understand, right? Because everybody else can probably say it's a good move, it's a bad move. We can add the realism into it, right? When we prepare a projection or a forecast, it doesn't matter whether you say it's good or it's bad. If it's not making money, it's not making money, right? So from that perspective, we really get to a very strong point in a transaction itself, which is what we need to be able to leverage. Now, how do I do it? So the first thing about M&As is, as soon as you Google the word mergers and acquisitions, what you get are very theoretical perceptions about what a merger is or what an acquisition is. But the second you try to deep dive to understand what goes on in a merger or what happens in a merger, you get lost. Because there's a plethora of information, all unconnected, which exists, and each business, especially in the consulting space, guards their secret sauce with their life. Right? If McKinsey knows that this is how I can make a merger happen, and this is my secret sauce, McKinsey is not going to go about publishing a white paper on it. Right? Neither are they going to participate in McGraw-Hill's annual survey, or they're not going to write articles or study materials about how to execute the perfect merger. Because the secret sauce is something so essential in the equation itself, it can kill or foster a merger. So most of what is going to happen is a tailor-made strategy based on the experience that we've had across a couple of mergers, which can help simplify the process, right? So we try to use this internally as a step-by-step rule book or a guidebook, which I'm going to try and share. We try to simplify the ambiguity that exists with business itself, and it tries to give you a very objective view to making a decision, which is very important, because a decision should not be based on one person's belief. It should be based on organizations understanding together that this can be the fruit that they can yield at the end of the transaction. So the first step is setting up the right M&A strategy. Now the word strategy is again very misunderstood. Strategy is usually seen as a goal, but strategy is not a goal. Strategy is a way in which you work. It's what differentiates you, or what allows you to be able to remove those choices that you don't necessarily want to be making. Right? So many organizations will say, hey, what's your organizational strategy? They will give you something like, I want to hit 10,000 customers over the next 5 years, and an average customer should be paying you 500 rupees on a subscription. But that's not really how strategy works. So strategy would be something on the lines of, I want to be the best at what I do. Let's say it's financial services. Let's say it's a practice management tool. Whatever it is, I want to be the best to enable 1,000 entrepreneurs to be able to reach XYZ goals. Right? So that allows you to make fewer choices. For example, let's say somebody is not an entrepreneur. I'm not going to do business with them. Let's say it's not a business that could benefit from your transaction. You're not going to sell them. Right? A strategy is an enabler that helps you make lesser choices. The second step is set up a goal statement. Now, even the large consulting firms I've seen here sort of falter because they do not set up a single line goal statement. If you ask them why a merger or transaction is happening, they will not have an answer to it. But a single line statement gives you a lot of power because it aligns all your energies towards a certain direction that you want the transaction to take. Third one, very important again, mostly because a lot of businesses have a lot of choices. So let's say you're in the technology industry, you have 20,000 odd companies which are there in Bangalore which also provide technology services, right? And the second you start going a little deeper and deeper, you start to see, hey, there are another 10 companies that I could view, there are another 20 companies that I could view, but not everybody is the right fit. Once you set up a well-documented strategy on how you're going to pick your targets, that will help you eliminate better. Then create well-thought-out target profiles. Again, this is something extremely important. You have to know who your potential target asset is, right? You need to be able to close your eyes and imagine what the CEO of that company looks like, what kind of organization he's leading, what kind of benefits and skill sets he's bringing to the table. Now, unless and until you do these steps, most of the time the transaction itself is bound to fail, right? Because as you get in, the more number of people that get associated, the lawyers get associated, your valuers get associated, your advisors get associated. They don't have a direction to think from, right? So a lawyer is going to think purely in terms of contractual terms. Hey, this is not going to work out. He's not agreeing to the 2-year, let's say, lock-in post-transaction. And then you say, okay, let's drop it, right? But that's not the objective. You've not set out to achieve 2 years of his lock-in as the objective. It helps you make decisions in a much better way. The fifth step is engage. How do you connect with them? How do you meet with them? How do you discuss with them? How do you place a value proposition? And the last one is one of my favorites, which is the post-merger or post-transaction integration. Right? How do you get two businesses to come together and start operating as one, start thinking as a unit? So diving right in, a couple of key points when you're setting up the right M&A strategy is you need to think inward. Right? You as a business, what are the challenges that you face? What are the inhibitions to growth that you face? What are the things that are there within your business that are stopping you from achieving the next point of scale? Or what are the things that are there in the market outside, whether it's your competition, whether it's macroeconomic trends, that are not going to allow you to achieve your full potential as a business? And the most important thing is 5 years from now, when I look back, will I be in the market or will I be wiped out? Right? What will allow me to stay relevant and what will allow me to succeed in this business over the next 5 years? The second you start thinking about these questions, you also start to realize that a lot of your dreams and aspirations might have challenges or inhibitions which might set the foundation for what you want out of your target profile. So we've created like a simplified index or chart of sorts. So one is by level of synergy and one is by level of competitiveness. Right? Towards the right, you have a high level of competitiveness. Towards the upper side, you have a high level of synergy. Now let's say a business is an extremely good competitor of mine, right? And he also brings in a lot of synergy to me as a business. What is the strategy that I would adopt? Right? Would I adopt an acquisition kind of strategy? Would I adopt a merger as a strategy? Or would I try to do a joint venture or a new kind of engagement as a strategy? Right? So this tries to address that question. Let's say the synergy levels are extremely high, but the level of competitiveness are very low. There I would look at an acquisition for inorganic growth. Right? If I look at on the other side, I would look at a merger for organic growth. Here I would look at an acquisition for inorganic growth. So this allows you to be able to play a little bit in terms of understanding the business as well. So if you look at, if the level of synergy is extremely low, but you know that the level of competitiveness is extremely high, I would look at purchasing a majority stake in the business. Right? So it tries to simplify some of those questions that tend to come up on whether you should be pursuing an acquisition, a merger, or a joint venture. If any of you guys have questions, then please do raise your hands in between so I can go through them. It's a 2-hour session, but I think I'm prepared for 1:45. So, while setting up a goal statement, right? So, as I explained earlier, it's very important to set up a goal statement for any merger or any transaction because it aligns efforts, it aligns energies towards a common goal that we're going after. It allows you to explain the rationale behind a merger or an acquisition to your directors, to your board of management, and helps them also to start thinking in lines that you are thinking in. Right? So we created a simple one-line statement which contains the specifics that are required from every single one of the single sentence objective statements, right? So to aggressively achieve delivery and market capabilities. So they have a two-pronged strategy to this. So what is the core objective is answered with delivery and market capabilities. To enter the BFSI industry in Canada, right? Specifically where, when, how? Over the next 5 years and add $100 million in revenue, which is $40 million in 3 years, and add $27 million in FCFF, which is $7 million in 3 years, to improve sustainability by diversification and access to sales talent. Right? Now it seems like a simple little statement unless and until you break it down. It breaks down into a certain set of questions that every single goal statement needs to have, which is when, where, why, how, and for what. Right? So if you have these questions answered, you should be able to communicate it to every single party in a transaction in a way that it does not get diluted down. Second, the third step to it is identifying the targets. Now that you have your objective very clearly laid out, the next step is you go out and try to find a way for you to find a fitment to a company or a business that you think could be a potentially good asset for you to acquire. So this also has a huge reference to acquirers' 5-year plan as well, where we are going out as an organization. A realistic look at synergies. Yes, you will adjust some sensitivities. What if this happens? What if does not happen? What if we overperform here but underperform here? What inhibitors exist to achieve synergy gains, both short-term and long-term? What inhibitors exist to maximize enterprise value itself? A risk mitigation plan for potential pitfalls. So I know, let's assume that I overestimate the customer quality in a potential asset, right? Now you should have a plan B. You should have a plan to chase after if you have done that activity of overestimating. It allows you to go back and correct it rather than say that the merger failed. And it is a fact that over 89% of transactions, especially in the M&A space, fail to achieve their objectives with which they started off. So you have to be even more careful when trying to look at a risk mitigation plan, because you know there is an 89% probability that it's going to fail. Right? So you rather have a risk mitigation plan and try to salvage the asset rather than trying to say that we've lost time and energy. And the acceptable margin of tolerance for deviation on such expected gain. Right? So are you ready to say that, okay, I'm okay with 20% of their clients turning back. I'm okay with 10% of their employee set leaving the organization.
So you said 89% failure. Is it at the identification level itself or after the process to actually to merge or acquire the businesses?
Right, so this is actually on transactions that have been entered into. So it's not even at identification. It's at post-transaction level that 89% of mergers fail. So it's a very large number. In the last 5 years, McKinsey has written, Boston Consulting Group has written extensively about it. And the problem, I would say, is not only in any of these, but is also on over-aggressively trying to acquire assets. Right? So they go out and acquire competition or potential competition without doing the groundwork first. Right? And then realize that they are not capable of managing an asset of that kind. So, but yes, that's 89% of completed transactions that have failed. So once you have set up your target profile, you need to create an evaluation compatibility checklist. Right? So these are the basic set of questions that you would evaluate from a company. Obviously, you're going to scan through hundreds and hundreds of companies. Maybe as an advisor, you might have access to 10 companies or 5 companies. So you might choose a more selective process with more elaborate compatibility questions. But you would try and evaluate as an organization what are those checkpoints that you really need to have from them. So this is what I think it's a little muddled. Let me try and open it up. right? So we've just tried to break it down into a simple set of questions that we could ask. Against each of them, the business gives a certain gradient. Is it critical? Is it high? Is it medium? Is it low? Critical are the ones that I cannot do without, right? So if something is critical and on the checklist or the compatibility checklist they fail, then I immediately make that decision that asset is not worth pursuing for an evaluation. So in this case, taking the goal statement forward itself, business from Canada exceeds 51% of last year's top line. It's a critical measure, and I'm going to assign a score or a weight of 10. This is where the board of directors or the management gets involved to say what is critical, what is not critical, what is a high risk or what is a low risk or what is a medium risk. You need to have all of these questions answered. So on the business side, on the sales side, on their management side, on their profitability side. So these are some basic questions that you would look at asking from the asset, which allow you to make that decision of whether you want to put that effort to go and do a deep dive on the business itself.
How did you derive that numbers over the last one?
It's a yes into score. So and A is 2.
Yes.
So there's a formula that we've used on this. So if it's a critical measure, obviously you score well, you do better.
What is the last line, sir? Above 150 is what?
So above 0 to 100 you stop, you don't go further. 100 to 150 you reevaluate whether your goals and objectives are right. And at 150 to 300 you start looking at it for the next stage. That portion is a little muffled here, so that's why I redirect you back. So once you have created your checklist, now you need to scan the environment. You need to be able to pick up the companies that could potentially fit. So the first step is scan the industry itself. Right? So there are a huge number of tools that are available out there. Some of the ones that we use is VCC Edge. We use Venture Intelligence. So these are companies where I can get private company financials in the format that I want, where I'll be able to fetch only the information that I want and try and populate that. There are more expensive tools like Provis and Capitaline, which also provide this information to you, but I guess those are more beneficial for a public company. Once you have done that, you prioritize them. You know, many of the times the organization itself or the management itself has a certain affinity to a certain set of companies. They know that they're doing better than them in some fashion or way. You give them a higher risk, a higher gradient and approach them first while starting moving to the other assets later. In terms of elimination, you try and see how you can eliminate as much as possible. It's very important to run this exercise because it's not possible for any company to scan 1,000 companies that are potential targets for them in a month or 2 months or 3 months. And the game is about speed. If you're not there fast in the elimination process, then the energy that you started off with as management dies down. Right? So every day that passes by, they're losing a little bit more confidence on whether they need to go in for the merger or not. But you, as somebody on the finance side, know the value of a merger, so you stay held on. So when you offer the proposition to them on the day that you've done it, if you offer the proposition to them a little late, then you end up risking them going back on the word itself. So the next step.
Do you have any idea whether now a lot of talks are going about merger of banks? Do they follow any of these?
Merger of banks actually has a more complex story, right? So there is also the fact that many of the times they want to cleanse a book. Their NPA as on a book level might not be great. So their EV might be getting hurt or their market cap might be getting hurt. There is no way they will get out of a transaction, right? So they will not, unless and until they do a merger or they do an acquisition, they will not be able to salvage market capital and will risk it going down, right? So there might be a lot more force from the management to say that go ahead and try to merge with another bank which has a healthier book, so that you can clear up a lot of those things. I think the last thing that they look at is operational synergies, right? Because I think it's at a foundational level, it's a lot larger. I have seen in the past where we advised one of the BFSI companies that they do look at operational synergies, but at younger banks, right? Like for example, Janlakshmi Bank is an up and coming bank. Lord Krishna Bank, it's an up and coming brand. So they might look at picking up assets or merging with assets that are doing pretty well. Where they don't have a focus, they could help them defray the operational cost of getting there. So, I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
What I had in mind was that like Bank of Baroda, Vijaya Bank and Dena Bank are being merged.
Yeah, so there is also
see,
one is book, the other one is competitiveness. Right? So I'm sure in some way if they have hired an advisory company like McKinsey or BCG, they would have done this paperwork. But I think the ball is already set in motion when they decide. Now creating a target profile. So what I have done is I've tried to give you one of the samples of the actual work that we as an organization have done. I've changed some of the names so it does not conflict, but a target profile significantly helps the success behind which you're chasing an asset, because it gives the management exactly what you're going after and gives them a snapshot view. Our goal is always stick under 2 pages for any kind of snapshot view, and it should take less than 20 minutes to go through all the salient points of the company. So this is a simple target profile that we created for a very large organization, where we are helping them identify assets for acquisition. Right? So this tries to, in a concise way, communicate all that needs to be communicated about the company. All the names are obviously, they're just placeholders. So you talk about the current market, the product, what is in it in the long run, what are the specific actions that the company has taken. We gather this information from news reports, from interviews, from scientific journals, from industry mentions. The current product profile, some of this information is also readily available. For example, numbers like revenue you can fetch directly from any of these database solutions. But when it goes to a split, you need to have an insider, you need to be able to work with somebody within the business, maybe a sales guy, maybe a business guy. Some of the times we say we are customers or potential customers of a project, and then we get them to pitch to us, so we do extract some information in that way. So we have to be very clever to get this information in a way that it does not lead to a conflict at a future point of time, because ethically we need to always stay within our boundaries and disclose what our intention is for the organization. And most organizations we have seen, the second you start talking about an M&A, their eyes light up, they are interested, because everybody wants to unlock equity value at a point of time. So they are more forthcoming to give you information, but there might be a lot of back and forth, because their finance team might not be as proactive as an acquirer's finance team. So we look at a top market split. Some of this information is sort of in white, this thing, because I can't change too much about it, it'll look like nonsense. A SWOT, a pipeline, which is their order book, what are they looking at over the next few years. Some key financial information, what if they're publicly traded, if they're not publicly traded, what their NCAP is like, what debt is sitting on their books, what kind of capacity utilization they're having, which you can do a backward math. If you give them 3 scenarios to pitch for a project, you will be able to arrive at the capacity utilization currently. Some scores that we also use, we call them grid scores, but they're all online available. They show, for example, Piotrowski F score suggests how fundamentally strong is the book. Benesh M score, whether it's window dressed or not. The Z score helps you identify the sustainability. A gram number helps you to find potential to maintain or sustain the key growth objectives. Right? These are all numbers that can be crunched with numbers in the balance sheet and P&L.
No, this 27 means.
No, this is just a placeholder number, but there is a gradient for each of those numbers. There is a acceptable number range. So the key considerations that you would be taking as a business and management. So if the management reads the first half of the first page and the bottom half of the second page, they should be able to get an idea of what you're trying to communicate. So what are the key considerations? Where are the possible scenarios? What is your single line recommendation? And what is the rationale for that recommendation? Right. So this is what you sort of leave the management with. It allows them to make a decision on whether to pursue the next step of engaging with the prospect or not. And once you have sort of identified that yes, these are the set of companies, like 3 or 4 or 5 companies that I want to pursue, I want to be able to take up a very simple diligence on the organization to identify whether or not there is any meat in this transaction. So then you move to the next few steps which are around the engage. So first step is soliciting interest. Very interestingly, you have Stanford, GSB, Wharton, all of them provide you cold email templates that you can write which elicit interest from somebody. These have all been made with a lot of research around what gives the most amount of outcome. Now these can be copy pasted, they've worked well for us as well. So you can solicit interest, very simply talk about what you want, and once you have the interest, you set up clean deal. Right? So this is one of the key hacks that we have used in the past. So we work with the management itself to set up a team which internally can come together. So we've done this from as small as a 20 employee company and something as large as a 600 employee company. So between all of them, it's unless and until you set up a clean team, you won't be able to achieve the outcome in a short duration of time. Right? So let's say company A is the acquirer, company B is the target. So we have an independent third-party clean team. Sometimes we are part of this clean team, and then you have a joint steering committee that is made by the management of both that tries to answer questions on both sides. So if you set up a really good clean team, so usually we have, apart from us, we also have a lawyer on board. We sometimes will have an actuary on board, especially if there are assets on the BFSI side. We sometimes will have a valuer if it's on the real estate side. So we'll have all of these guys who are part of the clean team who can basically filter or sieve out the nonsense that either of the managements might be telling you, right? Because obviously everybody wants the deal to happen, and you want to be that unbiased portion in the ecosystem that allows only a good deal to pass.
So this is initiated only by the acquirer or even the person who wants to merge himself with some other person?
Yeah, so what we try to insist is that, for example, we as an independent third-party advisory company, we try to play that role from an acquirer's end, right? But from an acquiring end, also it's a great initiative to do, but it should have balanced representation available, because if it's an acquirer, you need to have an acquirer also coming in, because most of the nonsense is usually from the acquiree's side. Right? So you need to be able to eliminate a lot of that.
My guessing is even the entire process can be initiated by the acquiring.
Maybe. So if you are an aggressive acquiree, your investment banker plays some bits of that role when you go out in the point one. He gets to that portion where he's eliciting the interest from potential acquirers. It can be switched back, but usually the process starts in reverse. Right? You start back at the engagement part and then try to go to a fitment, right? Rather than trying to create a profile. So another key thing while conducting the negotiation is you need to look at win-win-wins. One win is obviously the acquirer, one win is obviously the acquiring. And your third win is your employees. Right? Without your employees, there is no business. If you do not have your employees wishing or willing to stay back, we've gone through a transaction with a very large VC-funded company, and it failed in the last minute after the whole transaction happened because one of the promoters said he will not continue. And he was adamant about it, and he said, I don't like the new management, I'm not going to continue. But it was a couple of $1 million of transaction. It was a lot of effort from our side, a lot of it based on the transaction happening or the transaction closing. And it failed because of the people element to it. Right? So unless you create a win-win-win for all three parties, you're setting the whole transaction up for failure. If the employees are not rewarded from a transaction, then they don't see the benefit of working together. Right? So that's how we are as human beings. We need to see benefit when we're getting it. I'll give you an example from the APAC merger that they were referring to. So this was APC getting acquired by Schneider Electric 8 years back, 8 or 9 years back. So when APC got acquired, APC is an American company with 4 lines of management. Schneider is a French company with 8 lines of management. Average time for getting a promotion in a US company is 4 to 5 years. Average time in a French company is 3 years. Somebody who was at a manager level had to go to a deputy manager level, which is a clear failure of title, right? So it's nothing else. Like the pay and compensation is exactly the same. So Schneider came out with this amazing strategy. I think they were advised by one of the MVPs. Overnight, so we were working with them on Friday around 11:30, 12 in the evening, and we left for the day. And on Monday morning when we were back, the whole office, earlier it was red and black, it was painted green and blue. Everybody got a new laptop, everybody got a new flask, everybody got a new mug for their coffee. The meal was changed, and the whole day was an off for everyone. So basically what they were trying to do is they were trying to shock you into belonging. Right? So in one single day, nobody worked. There were events all across on all floors, people were distributing gifts, and that portion of the whole business, right, which was we are going to become a deputy manager from a manager, didn't hit you so hard. Right? All that while it was a conversation under water cooler that this is probably what is going to happen. But the second it came to these kind of tiny little nuances, their whole thinking or their whole thought process completely changed. Which is an amazing thing to be able to achieve from one day off. Right? You're getting 2 organizations to work together and believe that they're part of the same company. So when you're trying to arrive at a price, the interesting thing is first you arrive at a benchmark price, which is a market driven multiple, or which is probably a DCF or whatever it is. You try and arrive at a benchmark price. And then you evaluate potential synergy gains and losses. So if I club into that unit, I might be able to generate 10% more EBIT, or I might be able to, my EBIT would go down by 20%, or my team is going to, some part of my team is going to leave, so it's going to cost them some money to be able to salvage the team back, or there could be a cost in terms of moving employees from one organization to the other, because in an acquisition, you have to, as per law, give the right to the employee to choose whether they want to continue or not. Right? Because it's a new company, you cannot force them to adhere to the policies of a new company. So there might be some cost to hold them back, which needs to be factored in. And then you get adjustments for the way forward. Like I know that the sales, I'm going to have to recruit 2 other people at a senior management level to run sales for me because the CEO now is not the CEO. And then you reduce any negative synergies. So that also does exist. When 2 businesses do come together, they might need to operate out of 2 facilities. Though it's inefficient, they still have to operate. There will be a cost of employees traveling from one office to the other office. There will be a cost of moving goods from one facility to the other facility. So you will have to evaluate the negative synergies, and what you come up with is a final price. Now this final price is also a matter of a lot of debate, because many of the times people don't follow a theoretical viewpoint when it comes to arriving at the final price. They try to look at a market multiple and they stay there. But I've seen larger organizations try to pick this as a more structured route to get to the same place, because nobody can deny on any of these parameters. Right? In all other cases, you can say, no, I want WhatsApp's valuation, right? So, but that's not going to happen. You're not WhatsApp. So it helps eliminate some of those questions and choices. The next thing is a PDD. So when you're really getting to it, before you embark on a due diligence itself is extremely time consuming. It's quite an expensive affair. Depending on the size of asset, it could go into crores. So you try and go preliminary DD, try to evaluate some of the data information that they have provided and whether they are accurate or not, and whether you have to be aware of certain things beforehand before getting into further conversations. So we look at the acquisition rationale, the value creation potential, fact-checking some of the information that they have submitted, and preparation for a detailed due diligence. Right? So we also get most of this information ready for a detailed diligence. As one of the key things that you would do in a pre or a preliminary due diligence, you would do about 30 to 40% of the effort and about 60 to 70% of collation. Right? So the 60 to 70% of collation can reduce the total time for a transaction by a couple of weeks. So since you're doing it, we also try and prep them for the final due diligence. Here, another key tool or hack that we've arrived at is checklisting. Right? So a checklist allows you to get a lot of biases and a lot of information without necessarily asking the questions on their face. So if you say that, what's the health of your, how would you rate the health of your customers? Then you know that if he says 10, he's lying. If you know if he says 1, then you're in trouble. Right? So it's a way for you to very succinctly be able to understand how he feels about his own business, which might help for you to run a transaction in the future. So once you have arrived that this is the company that I want to be associated with, you try and integrate both businesses, because now you want them to function as one. It's very inefficient for two businesses to continue functioning as two businesses unless and until there's a very logical or real reason why they should stay as two businesses itself. So the post-merger integration is one of the most intelligent parts of a transaction. Extremely time-consuming, extremely strategic, and also it's what is paid the most in the entire transaction. So a post-merger integration could run into crores, even though the value of the acquisition was a couple of lakhs. Right? To just give you an idea, because it's so important for a company that's acquired to get it right. Because if they don't get it right, it's a lot of executive time that's gone down the drain. Forget about the cost element of it. So step 1 is planning. Again, just like you did set up a clear single line objective for the entire exercise of the merger, you set up a single clear line objective for the post-merger integration. Right? So here, a new tool that we have been adopting is something called OKRs. I don't know how many of you are very familiar with it, but it's called Objectives and Key Results. So we try and set up for every division of the organization, we try and set up the master objectives that we want to achieve and the key results that say that this objective has been achieved or not. Create a single line description of why this matters to everyone. So you need to have a value proposition to every single one in the organization. Develop a clear integration strategy around value drivers. What do I want? Do I want the number to go up? Do I want the number to go down? By what margin do I want the number to go up? Decide an achievable timeline for PMI accomplishments. So many of the times companies draw very large 3-year, 5-year horizons for it, but 3-year, 5-year horizons don't give you any direction to work towards. They have to be simple, they have to be short framed, and you should know if you're headed in the right direction or not. And enroll partners for addressing specific areas of performance. Right? So this is where an opportunity also comes for the chartered accountants itself, because here it involves working with management consulting companies, financial advisors, lawyers, investment bankers, all of them coming together, and they need to be working with you to integrate both of them. So for example, for a large manufacturing company that we worked with, we had a lawyer who was advising on labor law, which is very important because unless you have the employees moving forth seamlessly, it seems like a very tricky business to get into. The setup, so put together a strong steering committee just like we did earlier. The objective for the steering committee should also be laid out. A lot of the work that that actually goes into the integration is the setup itself. So unless you've got the setup right, the transaction is not going to happen quickly. Another important thing that we do when it comes to setup is we identify and put in place artificial milestones that the organization needs to get at, right? So, for example, one of the key tricks is you give everybody a deadline for when the transaction needs to close. You give everybody a deadline for when they need to achieve their post-merger goal. Now, this gets them to start thinking and enabling it rather than leaving it onto somebody else. Create separate functional teams. So, we try and create like a joint steering committee for finance, joint steering committee for marketing, joint steering committee for sales, which involves members of both companies. When they come together and you have given the objective or set forth the objective, they're likely to work together, and the fact that they're working together will also mean that they try to cut down the possibility that a lot of the organizational people will turn against the merger itself. Define key 30-day outcomes that are expected linked back to the M&A objective.
Sir, just to understand about the nature of type of things. One similar merger that happened was Tech Mahindra and Satyam.
Right.
Do you think any of these things would have been followed? Any idea of how they...
Yeah, so I'm 100% sure they would have followed it. But the only part is when they're doing a target evaluation, they have only one target. Right? It's a 5-cent. Like, you know, the company is available for scraps on the dollar. You might as well go ahead and acquire it and try to salvage the customers that they have. Because even if they have 10,000 crores in fraud, they probably have 30,000 crores of valid customer relationships that are worth working on. But there is a lot of bad blood that has transpired. So you would plan for a lot of work to ensure that the employees at least do not leave at that moment, because if they see the company crashing, they start saying that life is uncertain, we should not really continue with it. But a technology company is not worth much without its employees. Right? So I'm sure they would have followed a lot of steps. Probably the management's involvement would have been a little lesser, and operationally it would have been a lot more. And the way Tech M and Satyam's transaction happened was in a couple of months they got to the outcome, right? Which was keep all the clients happy. If Tech M had to go down on its profitability to keep the customers happy, they were okay with it. But they bought it at a very, very cheap price, which was lower than the book value of the assets. So, in my opinion, they would have followed it, just that the team that would have done it would have been a 100-member or 200-member team. So, on the consolidation side, you need to look at how both businesses should be able to come together, fully unlock value over a period of time. This is not only in the Companies Act kind of way, but as an organization itself, they should be looking at the book together. They should be looking at profitability together. Measurement every 90 days of the merger, you need to evaluate the short-term and long-term performance against those metrics and scores that you have set up. And then correction, right? So this is an important part. If you have to keep continuously evolving those scores, if you don't do that, then as the statistic goes, 89% of them fail. Unless and until you keep correcting, you won't be able to figure out new ways of reaching that goal itself. Right? So, to a large extent, that was my presentation. So, I think I'm very, very early. So I saved you 40 minutes back. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if you guys have.
At what stage is the tax implication considered?
Right. So whenever you're setting up the final price needs to involve any kind of taxation aspects to it. When you are on the preliminary side, the taxation is not a very important point to address, because typically a tax advisor or a tax lawyer for a complicated transaction takes about 45 days to 60 days to evaluate the taxation aspects to it, and you can't wait for that long. You would have been in a situation where you have all that hunger and thirst to get the two businesses together, but then you're waiting for tax advice from a consultant. It somehow doesn't sit well from a management standpoint. Though as a professional, you want to wait for that opinion. I've seen that if an entrepreneur wants it, he wants it. That's it.
And the entire process will take a much.
I would say 90 days is what it takes for a medium-sized asset. For a large-sized asset where you're talking about 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees, or maybe a 5,000 crores or 10,000 crores in management, then you would be looking at 180 days. But many organizations, because they do not put an artificial milestone to achieve it, they end up taking years. So, does anybody else have?
How do you find targets? I mean, if you know what is the acquirer's, what he is looking out there. So how do you go about searching for them?
Right. So one of the key things that we have done is try and sign up for databases. Right. So Capitaline, Progress, Venture Intelligence, VCCH, they give you private company financial information. So you can put down those filters that you want. Let's say technology industry with this size, with this employee headcount, and it will filter down and give you those assets that are available. They are about 80% accurate, but they should do the job. There are also M&A specialized deal databases. So one of them is run by a friend of mine. It's called Private Circle. So companies like this actually help you curate a deal out of it. Right? So if you say my goal is to achieve a headcount-based leverage, then they will try and show you employees with a high employee number, but with low revenue per employee.
Okay, so let's take if I have an acquirer like who wants to get the funding. He doesn't know who's the acquirer, but he's willing to dilute it. So, like, should I go and ensure that I'm there on these databases?
Right. So if it's a private company, most of that information already exists. You would have access to any private company's financials. But for a smaller company, the asset is not really the balance sheet. Right? It's not in the P&L. Sometimes you've cracked something on the, let's say, on the technology side, or on the sales side, or on the marketing side. In which case, you have to be the one who's advising them by profiling the potential acquirers and going and talking to them. I would say for smaller companies, in the past we have helped from an acquirer standpoint a lot more than from an from an acquiree standpoint than an acquirer. And
what point do you know that the merger has been a success or a failure? When do you stop selling the artificial ones?
okay, so see, typically the second it moves on from a consolidation or an objective, right? So when you go into more business related targets only, for example, in 6 months I need to get my revenue up. Once you've got into that 6-month target, your 3-year target is anyway going to happen, or it's not defined by the objectives of the merger. It's defined by how they work as an organization. So you could drop the objective at that point of time and then just say that the merger happened and it was successful or not. But if they show problems that are coming out of the merger, right? So let's say in one of the cases, a co-founder after about 6 months in the business said that he does not want to continue and he was taking the tech team with him, right? Which is a large part of the business asset itself, because you didn't have anybody knowledgeable enough to continue. So in that case, you would say that you still have to continue with it because the objective was to build a great technology, and now you don't have you have one missing leg, which you as a business owner or as a management person should be able to provide them that solution.
State companies, what sort of, because any news out, they face a lot of ripples in the market. How do they see that
Right. So most of the time for listed companies, it's a positive move to acquire, right, or to merge, because together everybody expects that there is some kind of synergy that they have thought through or imagined. That might not be the case, but it gives a positive vibe that now the management is able to handle a larger organization. What is important is on whose balance sheet that is getting merged to, right? So if you have a great winner of a company that is merging or that is acquiring a smaller company, then it's good. Where for example they have a high P, right? So there the combined P will go up. But if you have On the other hand, if you have a company which has a very low PE, where the confidence of the management is very less, then even acquiring onto their balance sheet will erode value on your balance sheet. So for a listed company, it becomes very complex because when you run a simulation, you have to take the probability that huge hundreds of crores of market capital will just vanish. And the shareholders that are there, if they get the feeling that the merger is not going to work out, they're going to dissent. Right? So when they dissent, you have nothing that you can do unless and until you own maybe say 75% through your FII holdings, you own 75% of the company.
How does actually valuation plays a big part, right? So how do you actually, in reality, how do you reconcile between the two? So I'm not sure like acquirer will be wanting to acquire it at less and acquiree will want. How do you deal with it?
Right. So see, when it comes to valuation, the important thing is value is in the minds of an individual.
Predetermined. Already they know what they're.
Yeah. So an acquirer obviously wants to pay as little as possible. An acquiree wants as much as possible. Now you can align them by knowing what motivates them for that valuation. Right. So from an acquiree standpoint, they're going to pitch at a valuation is to the acquirer. Right. I know, for example, in the last session, which was there, a seminar on I think fundraising, right, a couple of weeks back. Why is WhatsApp valued the way it's valued? Right, $18 billion for a company that makes no revenue, has no advertising, and works on a tiny piece of real estate, which is your phone. And the second you introduce advertising, it's going to kill your business.
The user.
Yeah. So your user is not going to continue with you. Then why is it worth $18 billion? Now, from Facebook's point of view, the only nut that they've not cracked is interpersonal relationships. Right? You could be connected to your friend on Facebook from your school or your college, but he's not the guy that you want to hear from. He's not the guy that you want to talk to. Right? But the guys that you WhatsApp are the guys that you want to be in conversation with. If I customized your feed to include more references to the friends that you are in active touch with, you would spend more time on Facebook, which means you would consume more content on Facebook. So together as a unit, I'm worth a lot more. To get this portion of it, spending $18 billion is not big amount. Because that's the only thing that I don't have, that if they went to somebody else, let's say Google Plus, and Google Plus cracked that, they would survive. So from a valuation standpoint, for Facebook, it was worth $18 billion. For the acquiree company, they didn't have an idea about what number they want. If you ask them, they would have said, I'm worth $50 billion, right? But aligning those are usually an advisor's job. Once you get into closed rooms with each of them, you know what motivates them, what they're willing to go for. And finding that mid-level or that mid-ground is easy. But yeah, many of the times it happens in coffee shops, not in coffee.
Sir, you said
That was just driven purely by tax considerations.
Yes, quite a few.
They're quite normal.
Yeah, they are quite normal, but so there are two kinds of transactions, right? One kind of transaction is where they're trying to leverage on a huge amount of tax credit which is sitting on their book, which they'll not be able to clear out with the current state of business. There are another bunch of companies which are actually shell companies that are used to park tax credits and tax benefits. The second one is not something that I want to talk about, but the first one, obviously, there are companies that have had a great period of time and then they have all these credits that are accumulated, but them as a business it doesn't make sense to continue, right? But they still continue the operations because they're a public company or they're a listed company, and acquiring them makes a lot of sense for a larger organization because they can avail of the tax credits immediately. But that also has, from a taxation perspective, the 51% holding still applies. So it has to be done very intelligently. You have to move operations and then you have to move the tax credits or avail of the tax credits.
Sir, the database is available for acquirers who are looking for suitable companies in a particular industry. Similarly, acquirees looking for acquirers in
Right. So there are of late there are a lot of platforms that have come up. For example, one of the ones that we use is BankerPay. Right. BankerPay has a lot of acquirers which have who have come up and said these are the kind of companies that I want to acquire. And same thing, there is an Indian company that has just started up a couple of days back. I'm not able to recollect the name. But there are these platforms where companies come out and say this is what they want. So an acquiree also can come out and say that they're looking to get acquired, and an acquirer can also come out and say that they're looking to acquire. But it's still not picked up. So for example, on the acquirer standpoint, we get 5 to 6 deals in a month. And most of them are companies that honestly in India would not want to sell. Right? So for example, we get repeated requests for finding companies that are in the cloud telephony space. Right? Cloud telephony is an extremely highly profitable business. And over the last few years, they've grown significantly. Now that company does not want to sell. It wants to acquire. Right? So there are 5 players in India who have any kind of market share. And those 5 players are controlling the market. Why would they want to sell? Right? So those kind of deals do come along. And the remaining 4 or 5 of them, many of them are real estate, many of them are infrastructure, which might not be companies that you have ready access to. But acquiree side, I mean, there are hundreds of companies that come and say they want to get acquired. So that I think there's no shortage of those.
And now you said 89% failure. Now what do these failed mergers do? Do they again demerge or?
No, I think it's too expensive to demerge. If you failed, it's because you failed on the objective you set off for. It's not because you failed as an organization. Because if you fail as an organization, you will collapse. Right? So, but if you went ahead and you set up that in 5 years I want to be able to leverage this to grow to, like I gave an example, to Canada and do $100 million, they would have probably done $40 million and they wouldn't have a way of reaching that $60 million gap. But I would have paid a $40 million fee for acquiring that company. Right? So which is why it has failed. It's failed to deliver results or return on the investment that I put in, but not really failed to get 2 businesses to work.
So what do they do? Do they?
I think demerger is much more expensive than a merger.
So, what was the way forward?
So I think they will have to think the strategy of the objectives with which they sat down. What time is already spent is spent. You only have to look at the next few years where you come together as a business to build it. And a lot of the work is in the weeding of the shaft. Right? You need to get rid of all those leaking taps that are not really working, but you made an assumption that it will work in 5 years. You need to get rid of all of those assumptions. And many of the times they might fail genuinely not for bad intent. Right? Therefore genuine causes it's occurred in such a way that they were not able to achieve those synergy benefits.
Do they go back to see what actually went wrong, or at what point they failed?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. They try to do a root cause analysis to find why they did not hit that objective. But no amount of root cause analysis will give you the answer for the next 5 years. It will probably only tell you what went wrong in the last 3 years.
No, but ultimately that 89% should come down to 70 or 60.
Yeah. So I think the solution to that is in planning better, in setting the right objectives and aligning the organizations on day one. Many businesses, I realize, don't spend time on this. So when they actually do go out to execute a transaction, they realize that they're not prepared for a transaction. Right? So a company also needs to be mature enough to acquire another company. It's like if I was to take my friend's car, I should have the fuel to run that car. If I don't, it's a car in my garage. Right? It was a car in his garage, now it's a car in my garage. So if you don't have the fuel, you don't have the ability to run that vehicle, you would rather not venture into it.
How, as a professional, how do you structure your pricing? I don't want quantification, but the logic, whether it's fixed, it's pricing, I mean it's variable, success fee basis, or retainership basis. How do you structure it?
Okay, so typically, like for an acquisition, right? If you're looking at an asset-based acquisition, like I want all their assets to sit on my balance sheet, and I know him as the management person is only essential for the next 18 months. I give him a straight away a compensation in cash plus stock. Maybe stock, if I feel that giving him stock will not dilute my market cap, But if I feel that it's okay, I can afford to pay that out in cash, then I would do tranche payments. Typically, first 6 months they receive the first tranche. Between 12 to 18 months they receive the second tranche, and after 24 months they receive the third tranche, which coincides with the lock-in period that you would have in the agreement that the founder needs to continue. Because if he does not continue, then you say, I'm not paying you the last tranche, which will allow him, which will force him to continue with you as a member. For businesses where the most important asset is the employees, right? You also set up certain milestones for how many employees continue, how many employees don't continue, right? So I can say that I have a tolerance for 10% of your employees leaving. If more than 10% leave, then I will adjust the pricing by 10%, right? Or by 15% or by 20%.
So I'm actually talking pricing from your professional fees. Like how do you determine a proposal to your...
Okay.
Like I don't want a number, but I just want to know how you devise the strategy.
Sure. So, for example, a post-merger integration requires a lot of effort. So there's always a fixed fee. You're taking on the burden of somebody else's business. So it's usually, I would say, 10 to 15 lakhs per transaction. We've done as low as 5 lakhs because for a smaller company, if I say 10 lakhs is what I'm going to charge you, he's going to say it's okay, I'll wait for the merger to fail, right? So you don't want that to be the situation. You'd rather help them out. For leading them through for the objective setting and the strategy setting, that portion of it, depending, it's like a doctor. So you know he's a good fund. He knows, he's going to draw out a lot of energy from you. You would price 15 lakhs, 25 lakhs, 50 lakhs, I mean, whatever is comfortable. Yeah, but there is no fixed range for it. The second you start talking in crores, they will hire a Bain or a McKinsey or a
but is it always a fixed fee or it's also like variable, like success fee basis or something?
Variable is from, if you're going from an acquiring standpoint, then variable is also an accepted measure. It again depends on what kind of rules are applicable to you based on your practice allowances. So if a percentage share is not allowed because you're a member in practice, then that's not something you can do. But normal standards across investment banking is its percentage on the closed transaction, except for prep work. Prep work requires yeah. So there's another large company where we're working on absolutely no percentage fee, but it's an acquiree trying to prospect for an acquirer, where they're paying a good retainer every single month because the transaction is more complex and it has a lot of decision makers to pay a percentage fee. Like it has some really large names in the Indian IT industry who would not be okay with paying a percentage because effectively, they've invested money at like 5% for like 5 crores, and then we come on board and we say we want to get 5% by putting in more money. So they're in charge of retail.
And what if somebody, like let's take a small company, maybe like say turnover of say 5 crores or something, which is going to sell, and they're giving you stocks upfront if you achieve it. Like I mean, maybe not a success fee, but maybe stock. Like I guess that's
so that's just a way of
compensating,
quoting the real intent of the transaction. If they give you stock, you should also play that role of being an internal member of the organization. So you must be permitted to receive that stock because free, at least from an ICAI standpoint, they could look through the transaction and say you're receiving compensation in a percentage fee manner. It's not alien in investment banking that it happens, but we avoid any kind of transaction that involves us getting stock because of the implied taxation in the transaction. Right? So by the time we sell it, if they have had a liquidity event, I receive the same fee, right? But I get taxed at the taxation of the next event. So we try and avoid those kind of scenarios.
So it's more preferable to go on something on cash basis.
Yeah, it makes more sense. And as professionals, your payroll cost is going to be high, especially on the mergers and acquisition side. A very junior resource would also be upwards of 2 lakhs a month. So if you're cognizant of that, it's not possible for you to work purely on a success fee many of the times or on a stock-based fee unless you're flooded with work and you can still do transactions just by connecting. So I saved you guys 15 minutes. Yeah. Thank you.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. That was an interesting session on mergers and acquisition. I thank Pradyumna for his time and effort sharing his knowledge. May I request our chairman Shavan Guduthu to present a gift voucher as a token of appreciation and respect. Thank you. Thank you all. Can I have our attention please? We have a students conference on December 15th and 16th. I request all your articles to get registered for this conference. Thank you.